On a map, it's just 32 kilometers of water between Bali and Lombok. Yet for millions of years, not a single native animal, bird or reptile, has crossed this invisible barrier, the Wallace Line. How could such a thin stretch of sea split tigers from kangaroos, elephants from cockatoos, and redraw the map of life itself? The answer challenges everything we think we know about nature's boundaries. A narrow strait cuts between Bali and Lombok, just 32 kilometers across at its closest point. On one side, forests echo with the calls of Asian birds and the rustle of macaques. On the other, the landscape changes almost instantly. Cockatoos flash white in the treetops, and marsupials, not monkeys, climb through the branches. No native land mammal, reptile, or even most birds makes the crossing on its own. The Lombok Strait is not a wall of stone or ice, but for millions of years, it has been a line that life itself cannot cross. The water is deceptively ordinary. Fishermen ply its surface, ferries run daily between the islands. Yet beneath the waves, the channel plunges to depths of over 200 meters, forming a hidden moat that has split the living world in two. On maps, the distance looks trivial. In nature, it is absolute. Here, the invisible Wallace Line divides realms as sharply as any mountain range or desert, holding back tigers and elephants on one side, keeping kangaroos and cockatoos on the other. This paradox, how such a short stretch of sea can separate entire worlds, has puzzled travelers and scientists alike, setting the stage for one of the greatest discoveries in the history of biology. In 1854, a young British naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace stepped onto the islands of the Malay Archipelago with a battered notebook and a fierce curiosity. Over the next 8 years, Wallace trekked through forests, sailed between islands, and set hundreds of traps. Every specimen was carefully logged, labeled, and packed. Beetles, birds, butterflies, and mammals, more than 125,000 in total, by the time his journey ended. What began as a quest for rare species soon became something else entirely. On Bali, Wallace found the familiar kingfishers, woodpeckers, and the elusive Bali tiger, though even then, sightings were rare. The forests rang with the calls of Asian songbirds, and macaques darted through the undergrowth. But a short sail east to Lombok brought a jarring change. Gone were the Asian woodpeckers and tigers. In their place, Wallace found cockatoos with crests like fans, friarbirds, and cuscus, a slow-moving marsupial found nowhere in Asia. The crab-eating macaque was the only land mammal to appear on both islands. Birds that filled Wallace's traps on Bali were absent on Lombok, replaced by Australasian species he recognized from natural history books about New Guinea and Australia. Wallace's notebooks filled with lists and sketches, each entry reinforcing the pattern, a sharp, sudden change in animal life across a narrow channel. The difference was not subtle or gradual, it was absolute. For Wallace, the evidence became undeniable. Here, in the heart of the archipelago, was a boundary that nature itself refused to cross. His meticulous records, collected specimen by specimen, demanded an explanation that would change the way the world understood the living map of our planet. 200 million years ago, every continent was fused together as a single landmass called Pangaea. Back then, animals could roam freely from what is now Asia to what would become Australia. But the world beneath their feet was restless. Over millions of years, tectonic plates drifted apart, tearing Pangaea into fragments and opening vast oceans in between. In Southeast Asia, this slow-motion upheaval created two immense underwater plateaus: the Sunda Shelf, which now links mainland Asia with islands like Sumatra, Java, and Bali, and the Sahul Shelf, stretching from Australia to New Guinea. These shelves once rose above the sea as dry land when the world was locked in ice. Mammoths and tigers could have crossed from Asia as far as Bali, while kangaroos and giant birds wandered the ancient plains of Sahul. But between these two shelves, the Lombok Strait remained a stubborn barrier. Even during the coldest ice ages, when sea levels dropped by up to 120 meters, the channel never became a land bridge. The seafloor here plunges over 200 meters deep, forming a trench that no animal could simply walk across. As the glaciers melted around 12,000 years ago, sea levels surged, drowning any remaining lowlands and turning the Sunda and Sahul shelves back into isolated islands. Today, the Lombok Strait still cuts a sharp divide through the heart of Indonesia. The deep water, strong currents, and ever-changing coastlines have kept east and west apart, shaping the very map of life. As one geologist puts it, the strait has always been the gatekeeper. No matter how low the seas fell, its deep channel remained open, holding the line between worlds. Isolation across the Wallace Line has shaped two worlds, each evolving along its own path. On the Sunda Shelf to the west, forests are home to orangutans, sun bears, and gibbons, creatures with deep Asian roots. Just beyond the trench, the Sahul Shelf supports tree kangaroos, echidnas, and birds of paradise, all tied to Australia and New Guinea. The difference is not just in names or appearances, but in the very fabric of life. Over millions of years, the deep Lombok Strait has acted as a filter, allowing only those species capable of extraordinary journeys to cross. Most mammals, reptiles, and even birds find the open water insurmountable. The trench itself plunges to about 250 meters, and currents race through its depths, sweeping away anything not built for the challenge. A biogeographer might call this a textbook case of allopatric speciation, where physical separation drives the birth of new species. Without gene flow, populations on either side have diverged, adapting to different climates, predators, and food sources. This is why orangutans swing through the rainforests of Borneo and Sumatra, while tree kangaroos climb the forests of New Guinea, never meeting in the wild. Even birds with their power of flight are mostly stopped by the strait. Only a few, like certain fruit bats, have managed to establish populations on both sides. Bats, with their stamina and wide-ranging habits, are rare exceptions. Proof that flight alone is not always enough. For nearly every other land animal, the Wallace Line remains the invisible boundary that shapes their destiny. By the early 20th century, scientists began to see that the Wallace Line was not a single razor-sharp border, but part of a more complex mosaic. As research deepened, new boundaries were drawn. The Weber Line, named after biologist Max Weber, traced a path east of Wallace's, running through the heart of the archipelago. It marked a zone where Asian and Australian species overlap, a center of balance rather than a clear divide. Further east still, the Lydekker Line outlined the true edge of Australian fauna, including New Guinea and its unique animals. These lines, now mapped in textbooks and field guides, reveal that the transition between realms is gradual, not absolute. The region between the lines, known as Wallacea, holds a shifting mix of species from both worlds, shaped by chance, endurance, and deep time. Some boundaries are not quite as absolute as they seem. Wind and water can scatter plant seeds across even the deepest channel. The rainbow eucalyptus, with its kaleidoscopic bark, grows wild on both sides of the Wallace Line, carried by storms or drifting on ocean currents. But for animals, the line holds firm, except for one remarkable exception. Recent genetic studies reveal that people living in Papua and Australia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, a trace of ancient humans who crossed the Wallace Line between 50 and 60,000 years ago. As one geneticist puts it, no other large animal managed this leap, but our ancestors did. A conservation biologist reminds us, the Wallace Line is nature's border, but humans found a way across. In the words of a local elder, we are all the children of travelers. Only 32 kilometers of water separate Bali and Lombok, yet almost no native land mammal, reptile, or most bird species has ever crossed this divide. Alfred Russel Wallace's 125,000 specimens and his meticulous records from 1854 to 1862 revealed a sudden, sharp change in species across the Lombok Strait, evidence that formed the basis of modern biogeography. Despite later discoveries of the Weber and Lydekker lines and rare exceptions like the rainbow eucalyptus, the Wallace Line remains a profound natural boundary. Genetic studies confirm that ancient humans, such as the Denisovans, were able to cross when most animals could not, leaving traces of their DNA in modern Papuan and Australian populations. Yet, questions persist about the exact mechanisms that kept so many species apart and how rare crossings occurred. The Wallace Line stands today as a reminder of how geography, evolution, and human ingenuity have shaped the living world, and how much we still have to learn about the forces that define life on Earth.